Whole meeting to order. Recommendation that the agenda for the Committee of the Whole meeting of December 13th, 2021 be adopted as circulated. Moved by Councillor Cunningham, second by Councillor Randhawa. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. Okay, today we're going through our 2022 capital budget and special projects planning. We have a report from our Chief Financial Officer, Ms. Bauman. Why don't you take it away?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce the capital budget and special projects portion of the budget for 2022. The document before you is the result of a process started in October of this year where department heads were asked to list capital projects and requests from the perspective of need as well as those where planning for projects that are to occur in the near future needed to be done. From there, sources of funding were allocated as recommended by the Finance Department, and finally the information was provided to the City Manager for his consideration. This document was then prepared for Council's deliberation at the Committee of the Whole today. I'd like to thank all of our staff for their time and effort bringing this part of the budget request together. As far as content, this document sees the largest requests to continue the work on our large utility projects, as well as investments into protective services and investments at the waterfront. As far as financial impact to our citizens and businesses, the proposed amount of funding to come from taxation is $200,000 less than in the previous year, or approximately a 1% decrease to the mill rate with respect to capital items funded as compared to 2021. As for format, we will proceed through the document before Council by category. Staff members are present to answer any questions Council may have of a particular request. If Council is satisfied with the item presented, there is no need to comment and we will move to the next item. If Council would like to discuss a certain request at greater length, whether it be its inclusion in 2022 and or the method of funding, we ask that Council verbally flag the item after it is presented, and staff will bring this item back after we have made our way through the document for Council to make a determination and their final recommendation to the regular meeting of Council today. In closing, we are confident that the document before you reflects Council's priorities as well as the highest needs for providing service through capital and special projects to the community while being mindful of the financial impact. And with that, if I could ask Council to flip to page 6 of the document for the Fire Department's requests. And there's just one more page down, Rosa. Thank you. So the first request is new fire hall building design to be an asset cost of $350,000 to be funded 50% from surplus and 50% through grant. The next item is a reserve pumper, and the asset cost is $1 million to be funded through short-term financing with the MFA. The next item is equipment, being a drying cabinet and engine 5 locker compartment modification to be funded through surplus. Asset cost is $31,000. And that concludes the items requested from the Fire Department. Could Council please go ahead and flip to page 9. This is our Building or Civic Properties Department. The first request is City Hall boiler replacement and HVAC. Asset cost is $100,000, all funded from reserves. Yes?
Just a clarifying question, no need to flag it, but I'm obviously in support of this investment, not just for the energy savings, but also for the reduction in emissions that I think would come with a more efficient system. I'm just wondering, do we have any projections on the potential cost savings or the energy savings on this new unit?
Oh, and with that, I will ask our staff member, Tom Joad, to come in. go ahead. You can come on up. That's right.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm Tom Javed. I'm the Facilities and Maintenance Manager for the City of Prince Rupert. So in regard to this question, all I can say is that our cost for repairs and maintenance for the HVAC components at the City Hall has doubled between 2020 and 2021, and it's largely due to the age of the system. Our projection is that the cost will keep increasing as the system is past its life expectancy. So the boilers right now are from 1985. Once the engineers have completed their design report for phased replacement of the HVAC components, we will have their recommendation based on sustainable and energy efficient design principles. Just to give you an idea, in 2020, we spent about $4,200 on repairs and maintenance. And 2021, it went up to almost $10,000. So based on that, it's once we have the design, then we will know for sure what sort of energy and sustainability savings we can have. Thank you.
The next item is the Leicester Center roof improvements. The asset cost is $40,000 to be funded out of surplus. The next item is library boiler and heating controls replacement on page 10. Asset cost of $50,000 funded through taxation. The next item is CN building revitalization. Asset cost $5.3 million. Funded $4 million out of reserve, $300,000 out of grants, and $1 million out of dividends. The next item on page 11 is a condition assessment building envelope and for the building envelopes and city roofs of city buildings. Asset cost $80,000 to be funded out of surplus. We will now move on to the policing portion of the budget. There's only one item on this on page 13, and that is the new detachment. The asset cost is estimated at $30 million, of which we will be funding through borrowing. The next item is on page 15. Is the arena brine header replacement. The asset cost of $60,000 funded through taxation. Moving on to the pool at the Recreation Center. Top pool slide and water feature replacement. Asset cost of $80,000 funded through taxation. And the last item for recreation is in the Jim Saccone Civic Center. Upstairs washroom accessibility upgrade. Asset cost of $60,000. Funded mostly through grant and in part through dividends. We'll be moving on to the real estate section of the budget. First item is on page 18, annual land purchase. This is funded, asset cost of $50,000, funded through surplus and reserves. Next item is Watson Island Power, asset cost of $35,000, funded through dividends. And at the bottom of the page, Watson Island Dam Safety Audit, $150,000 funded through dividends. Next page on page 19, final item in this section is the Canfisco Warehouse parking improvements. Asset cost of $30,000 funded through surplus.
Just one question for a little bit more context. When all these works are completed, do we know the number of net new parking spaces? And have we given any consideration to whether or not the new public parking will fall into the Rushbrook improvement area?
We'll have Mr. Pucci answer the question for you.
Thank you, Councillor. We believe there will be between 15 and 18 new parking spots that will be generated once the parking improvements are completed. We can make that area as part of the Rushbrook improvement area. We're just internally looking at whether that's the best course of action, just because it is a little removed from the main parking area. So that is under review, but it can be brought into that Rushbrook improvement area if we desire to. Thank you.
Are some of these parking spaces going to be designated just for the warehouse parking, or is it going to be an overflow from the Rushbrook fishing parking lot?
So and we have 4 designated reserve parking spaces right now for the Gymnastics Society, the users of that facility, and that's why we're looking at whether we bring that into the full realm of Rushbrook improvement, whether it is a good idea to have truck and trailer with boat going back into that area, turning around, or if it should just be for car and day use parking. So we're looking at a strategy on how we can maximize the parking there, but also make it so that it's not awkward and having trucks and trailers go back there. So we're just looking at how that can operate. We would like to obviously bring it into Rushbrook improvement so that we can have paid parking in there.
Thank you.
So those 4 parkings be for the gymnastic, right? So rest 14 parkings be like paid parkings, or like for who can choose those parkings? Like you said, 10 to 14, 15 to 18 parkings will be available, right? So 4 are available for the gymnastic, and rest of like paid, or like.
Yeah. So it's 4 right now reserved for gymnastics, and about we think 15. So it'll be a total about 14, 18 around in there. I mean, we have to really get in there and line it out before we actually can determine the exact amount of them. But right now on paper it looks like between 15 and 18. And again, we're just reviewing whether it will be paid parking for the remainder or not. As I was saying, is that since it's a little bit of a difficult area to get in and around, we want to avoid having people with truck and trailer go back in there because they won't be able to navigate and get out appropriately. So if we look at it as Rushbrook paid parking, it would be for single car only, day use. And so we're working out a plan on how that can operate. Thank you.
I'll ask a question that's not about parking.
Sure.
The Watson Island Power, it's in the way the description reads, it's a project that's likely to pay for itself over time. Is that correct? Because it's a cost savings over time. Just wondering how long that time frame would be.
It would likely pay itself off within 3 to 5 years. We are right now bringing diesel down to a generator and running that generator 24/7. So we're just looking at the alignment and how to bring the power down there. So it will translate into significant savings over time. Thank you.
So if I could ask council to turn to page 21. And this is the civic improvements section of the document. The first item is at the top of the page is streetlight replacement program, asset cost of $25,000 funded through taxation. The next item is waterfront development, asset cost of $10.9 million funded through grant. At the bottom of the page is cemetery sidewalks, asset cost of $20,000, funded through taxation. On the following page, page 22, is the Eidsvik Park renewal, asset cost of $50,000, funded through surplus. And at the bottom of the page is the McBride Sport Court, asset cost of $70,000, funded through grant and taxation. Moving on to page 24 is the single axle dump truck with sander and plow in the vehicles and mobile equipment section. Asset cost of $300,000, funded through short-term financing with the Municipal Finance Authority. At the bottom of the page is the GPS truck system. Asset cost of $50,000, funded through surplus. On the next page, 25, is the F-550 garbage truck for commercial use. Asset cost $400,000, funded out of reserves. And at the bottom of the page is the landfill dozer. Asset cost of $1 million, funded through reserves.
I'm wondering if you can speak to our procurement process and if it's feasible, given that we're going to be buying a few different pieces of major heavy equipment. Is it possible to consolidate into one RFP, or are they all two specialized pieces of equipment that need individual RFPs?
I'll ask Mr. Pucci to come up, but I can tell you that our procurement process would allow us to do that. It's just whether it makes the most sense, and I'll ask Mr. Pucci to speak to that.
Thank you, Councillor. These pieces of equipment are quite specialized, and they're different. Some of them are built on different chassis, and then you take the chassis and bring it to a coach builder who builds it. And then the dozer is a completely separate, specific piece of equipment. So we would go out to RFP on each of these singly and try and get best value that way. Thank you.
So are these pieces of equipment all new buy?
Yes, we're proposing new buys.
So they'll have warranties and everything like that?
Absolutely, yes.
Awesome.
Thank you, Mr. Pucci. We will now move to the transportation section of the budget. On page 27, the first item is bridge condition and safety assessment, asset cost of $200,000, funded through dividends. At the bottom of the page is the 14th Street retaining wall, asset cost of $100,000, funded through taxation. On the following page is the Seal Cove sidewalk, asset cost of $60,000, funded through surplus. At the bottom of the page is the sidewalk program, asset cost of $100,000, funded through taxation. On the following page, 29, we have our annual paving program, asset cost of $1 million, funded through taxation. And then we have our industrial park ditching improvements, asset cost of $150,000, funded through reserves.
I looking at the list, I noticed that there's some parts of it that reflect general programming, a kind of a general fund that I assume would be applied to a number of different things, and a couple of items that are more specific in nature. So I guess I'm wondering what the criteria would be for, say, the 14th Street or the Seal Cove sidewalk. How does that get a specific item versus the general fund allocations?
Specifically with respect to the Seal Cove sidewalk, this item was approved in the budget last year and therefore will be rolled over, and that's why it's funded out of surplus, because it was funded out of taxation this year.
And just to follow up, I noticed the 14th Street project comes up on 3 separate occasions here. I understand the reasoning behind it because they're different aspects of the project. So I'm wondering whether it would be either now or afterwards where we might hear a little bit more about why that project seems to be such an immediate need.
I'll ask Mr. Pucci to come up and answer that question.
Thank you, Councillor. So the 14th Street retaining wall, it's in a semi-failure state. It has a bulge in it. We have a house that is located right below it. And so when we went and looked at it, it is in immediate need of work. And what we're looking at doing, it is a very expensive build. What we're looking at doing is while we're in there, redoing the water on 14th Street and the sewer and storm on 14th Street. We think that's part of the reason why the bulges happen and some of the deterioration of the wall is we think that there's some drainage that has possibly come a little bit disjointed. So we want to make sure we get in there and fix that.
Is this going to be done in-house or by contractor?
This will be done by a contractor.
So it's pretty well a fixed cost then? It hasn't gone out to contract yet?
No, it has not gone out. We've just used our estimating numbers from recent walls that we've done, like 17th Street and on 6th Avenue to come up with the price.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Pucci.
I just have one question about the sidewalk program. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
The question I have is the $100,000 for the sidewalk program, is that a continuation of the downtown sidewalks, or is that for general sidewalk repairs all over town?
It's for general repairs all over town. We will be looking for tripping hazards and other hazards around town and fixing those.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Pucci. And now moving on to the solid waste component of the budget document, page 31. First item is asset cost of $130,000, funded through reserves, and this is the 240-liter collection bins.
Yep, go ahead.
Can I just ask the rationale for why 1,000, and maybe that's based on the amount of people that have asked for something larger, or maybe we're hoping to keep a number in reserve for replacement in the future?
Thank you, Councillor. It's a combination of both. We've had a number of requests so far, so we're projecting that once we start the program, we'll see that double or triple the number of requests, and then we'd like to keep a few hundred in the warehouse. Like we have a few hundred of each bin because we can do replacement or for parts. Thank you.
Mr. Pucci, under Wantage Road landfill closure, you've got $100,000, and it's coming. It's correct. It's going to come out of the utilities that are collected.
Maybe I'll just interject because that is the next item on the document. So is there anybody that has any other questions for Mr. Pucci on the previous item? Thank you. So the Wantage Road landfill closure is an asset cost of $100,000 funded out of utility fee. And I will step back now.
Do you have a follow-up, Barry?
Okay, I just wondered, like, our utilities come out every January, February, and they've been increasing considerably, and I'm seeing this 100,000 coming out of utilities. I just wondered if that's the proper place for it to come out of, or it should be a capital expenditure or something like that.
Well, thank you, Councillor. So at this point right now, we're unsure how long we'll be doing this testing. So as the justification talks about, is that there was a unilateral re-permit on the site. So originally there was what was called a pollution control order on the site. The site was closed in 1991, but during COVID, ministry staff reviewed a lot of the closed permits, and they reissued a permit that required the city to start some very rigorous programming and monitoring of that site. So it's in the order of about 96,000 to complete that. We've got a proposal to do it. We are looking at working with the ministry on finding a happy medium with that site possibly, and also we've talked about other uses for that site. So at this point, we're keeping it in operations, and as one day that might be reduced or removed.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Pucci.
And I will just add that because utilities are a self-funding fund, utility fees pay for all aspects unless we can find a grant for it. So it's appropriate for us to be paying for this capital item out of utility fees. The next item is on page 32 is the landfill cell closure with an asset cost of $2.601 million funded out of accruals. The next item is new landfill cell, asset cost of $1.664 million, all funded out of reserve and surplus. Oh, and in part accrual. And that concludes our solid waste section. We will now move to the water section on page 34. First item is the Woodworth Dam replacement. Asset cost of $5 million, funded in part through reserves and through dividends.
So I have one financial related question and then one project related question. You said in the context here, some of it's carrying forward. So I just want to make sure that what we're talking about is carrying forward everything we didn't spend last year plus an additional $5 million, or does the $5 million include what's rolling over from last year?
The $5 million includes the part that's rolling over from last year.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's good to know. And knowing what we know now with all the kind of hardships we've faced on this project, weather delays and construction issues and things like that, I'm wondering, can we get a little bit more context on some of those? I don't know if I want to call them high ticket items, but some of the larger cost overruns, just to give a bit of context on where we're at with that.
Absolutely, thank you, Councillor. So the major overruns are really delays. I mean, and so when a storm hits, we had several months worth of storm management and storm work. So we would have a large storm, it would wash out a certain area, we would have to go and rebuild that certain area, and then also kind of pick back up. So we lost several months due to these storms and repairs associated with the storms, not only on the project, but on other areas around the site. The other major factor was some geotechnical issues. So, you know, we did a very rigorous geotechnical program on the site, but even after that, we found once you drill down, there was fissions in the rock, there was and also soft rock areas. So we had to over excavate and take out more rock than we thought. And you know, when you take that out, you have to replace with also dowels and with concrete. So that obviously was extremely expensive. Bringing concrete and other items to this site is very, very expensive. Every little bit of gravel, sand, everything was all brought over by barge. So, you know, COVID saw a little bit of delay on it, but not as much as, say, the storms, the rebuild back after storms, and then also the geotechnical conditions. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Pucci. The next item is water treatment facility and submarine line engineering design. Asset cost of $4 million, funded through reserves.
Sorry, Mr. Pucci, I should have asked you to stay up there. I forgot these were back to back. I'm just wondering what would help me conceptualize why this particular item is relatively high without actually building anything. Can you give a little bit more context on the kind of scope of work and how much of that cost is related to federal requirements versus how much is actual detailed design work?
Sure. Thank you. So I think that 4 million is a bit generous for just the engineering and design, but it definitely will be in the millions. We put a $4 million number there because if we're able to get into any sort of ground prep or anything else, then we would like to have that money available and not have to come back to council for a variance or an amendment. But these are three essentially separate multi-million-dollar projects. We have the upgrades that have to happen on the mainland side, which is where our water system is. Upgrades on our side, which is the island side. We have a submarine line that has to be fully designed, and then we look at design for a very sophisticated water treatment plant for our certain very specific water. We also have to do what's called value engineering. That is a must with the province, and at that table we'll have provincial delegates and we'll have Northern Health delegates and we'll have city representatives on that panel. So that is another expense as well. We're looking at a $28-29 million build. So 15% to 20% in design and engineering is not uncommon in that number. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
The next item is on the following page, being the SCADA upgrade. The asset cost is $1.15 million, funded through reserves. The next item is the Park Avenue water repair paving. This asset cost is $95,000 and is funded through surplus. Moving on to the next page, 14th Street retaining wall, asset cost of $200,000, funded through surplus. Then there's the 11th Avenue 200 block to Alfred Street engineering and design, asset cost of $75,000, funded through surplus.
I have a question on this one.
Go ahead.
This this is something that's really not that old. I thought that 11th Avenue was done in the 90s, so I'm just curious as to why it's in such tough condition.
Thank you, Councillor. We find that pipe has some significant issues with it. It is a steel pipe for most of it, and in Prince Rupert, I think some of the predecessors and people that were putting pipe in back in the day didn't realize some of our soils were quite acidic, and also they used dredgeate, which is salient and acidic, and steel pipe in that atmosphere is pretty corrosive, and we find that type of pipe put in that vintage era is almost brittle, that your fingers can go through it once you get down and dig into it. It's nowadays we use PVC plasticized type pipe, and that's a lot better in our soils and in our conditions.
What do you think?
Just a question about the Park Avenue water repair paving. It is a ministry-controlled highway, and yet we're bearing the costs. Is there some element of that the ministry has an involvement with it, or is that just on us?
Thank you, Councillor. Unfortunately, that's on us. It's our water main that broke, that caused that hole and for us to repair. So when we do repairs on the highway, there's ministry standards for the thickness of asphalt, just because of the heavy truck traffic. So it's I think it's about double or triple the thickness that we have on our regular roads in town.
Thank you. Moving on to the flushing program in section 2, asset cost of $50,000 funded out of surplus. And then the Schwatlands dock upgrades, asset cost of $50,000 funded again through surplus. And the last item is on page 38. It's our annual water line funding. And it's asset cost of $750,000, funded predominantly through utility fees and in part through surplus. That concludes our water, and we will move into the wastewater. And that's on page 40. The liquid waste management plan is the first item. An asset cost of $750,000 funded through surplus and through grants. The next item is the SCADA upgrade. This is the wastewater portion. Asset cost of $450,000 funded through surplus and utility fees. The next item is the Hayes Creek replacement study. This is an asset cost of $100,000 funded through surplus. In the middle of the page is the industrial park treatment plant upgrade, the engineering for it. The asset cost is $100,000 funded through reserve. And at the bottom of the page, is the 14th Street retaining wall. Asset cost is $250,000 funded through surplus and utility fees. Moving to the next page is the outfall camera program. Asset cost of $25,000 funded through utility fees. Middle of the page is the outfall repairs. Asset cost of $100,000 and funded through utility fees. And then there's the Park Avenue wastewater engineering, 1100 through 1300 block. Asset cost of $150,000 funded through surplus. And on the next part of the page is our annual wastewater line replacement program. Asset cost of $750,000 funded through utility fees.
We got 3 questions. Go ahead, Barry.
With our solid waste and wastewater, with our system being one right now and down the road somewhere we're going to have to put in a sewer treatment plant, any of these upgrades in that, Mr. Pucci, are we looking down the road at the fact that while we're doing this we can possibly incorporate something down the road that can be used so we're not doing this a second or third time?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, absolutely. We have a administrative directive that we're working on with the federal government, and it talks about every time we do a line replacement and main line replacement, we do separation. So if we get into an area where we're doing repairs and it is a combined storm sewer system, we will go and separate from manhole to manhole to make sure that we've separated system and we're not just repairing a pipe. So we have a commitment to do that.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
It might be my own ignorance regarding accounting, but I have a couple of questions about the funding side. You've mentioned a couple of items that will be funded out of utilities and surplus, and I've also seen items where we talk about utilities as self-funding, so I'm not sure what the criteria is for having amounts from surplus included.
Those surpluses would be out of the utility surplus, so it wouldn't be out of
Okay.
any of the operating surplus. So it actually is just funds that we had collected through utility fees in the previous year that weren't completely expended.
Okay, and my other question is along a similarly naive line. You've got a column there for all of these with entitled reserve / surplus, and as you're describing these things, you're describing some things as having come out of reserve and some things as having come out of surplus. Could you just clarify that for me? And like which is which, and how do we determine how much is one and how much is the other?
Yeah, so because when I added more columns, it just became too small for everybody to understand. So that's why I've been saying, as I've been giving it verbally, whether it's just reserves or if it's surplus or a combination of both. So I've been trying to articulate it clearly in this forum presently. But if there's any questions where you'd like me to separate it out completely, it's not a problem. The document that is coming to council this evening, depending on what the recommendation is here, will actually separate out specifically reserves and specifically surplus.
Okay, thanks.
Now, I'm noticing both on the annual wastewater and the annual water, back on page 38, you've budgeted 750,000 basically for catch-all emergency repairs. I'm wondering how that compares to the last few years and if we're seeing an increase in that requirement.
Thank you. I can answer that question. So on average, our water is somewhere around 600 in that realm. It's 600 and a little bit over. And that's for the 2018 through 2020. 2021, we've noticed an increase. We're already sitting at about $625,000, and the year hasn't completed yet. And then as far as wastewater, the average between 2018 and 2020 was approximately $450,000, but in 2021 so far, we are at about 1.010 million. But we did budget 1 million, basically because of the drainage issue behind of Prince Rupert Boulevard that we were aware of. That happened in the winter of this year. So when I say winter, it was early in the fiscal year this year. So we ended up budgeting $1 million because, in part, we were actually allocating most of that towards outfall repairs, but the Prince Rupert Boulevard kind of took priority. So $750,000 is adequate. And actually, if there's any that we don't expend, it goes into the surplus, and then it goes ahead and helps to fund some of the items that we've been funding out of surplus that Councillor Adey was asking. Okay, so, sorry, where we just finished the annual wastewater. So now we will move on to special projects budget requests, and those are on page 46. So our first item here is survey benchmarks and rights of way. The project cost is $65,000. It's funded through taxation. The next item is asset management strategy. Project cost of $65,000 funded through a grant. On the following page, 47, we have public realm streetscape standards. Project cost of $60,000 funded through surplus. And then we have our parks and open space master plan. Project cost of $100,000 funded through surplus. And moving on to page 49. This is our special projects for vehicles and mobile equipment. And this item is titled the Fleet Management Report. Project cost of $25,000 funded through taxation. The following item is on page 51. This is in our transportation category. The first item is the active transportation strategy. Project cost of $100,000, funded in small part through surplus and the rest through a grant. And then there's the electric vehicle charging stations. Project cost of $20,000, funded through surplus and through a grant. Yes.
So we have already charging station, so we are putting by the Public Works new one.
I think they're in two different spots. So go, Mr. Pucci, if you want to answer that question.
So the Civic Center and the Calbay, right?
Thank you, Councillor. We are looking at putting one at the Civic Center and one at, in Calbay.
My question is maybe out of curiosity more than anything else, because I think these things are important and I fully support them. I'm just wondering if we have some sense of the degree to which the one that exists is being used, and what is the current demand? There's a good one, a good pun. For additional charging stations, and I'll say about it that I would be in support of them anyway, because I think it's certainly a forward-looking initiative, but I'm just wondering about usage at the moment.
Well, thank you, Councillor. We actually don't have any data on the current usage of the one that's in town. That was provided by BC Hydro, that one. This is another one that is, I believe this is called Charge the North, and this is the one where they're having installations all the way up the Highway 16. We know there is a need for it in town. There are more and more electric vehicles in town, so we're excited to put these in, but we don't have the data on how many people are using them daily. Thank you.
I'll just add quickly that that initiative, Charge North, is the idea is to have every 60 kilometers a charging station from Haida Gwaii to Kamloops. So part of the grant that this is part of is a bulk purchasing program that all the communities and regional districts across 6 regional districts are purchasing together to make sure that that network gets established, on top of the fact that BC Hydro is also doing level 3 chargers all across the north as well, in like rest stop areas down in our community as well. So the idea is that you'll actually be able to drive from Prince Rupert to Vancouver without having to, wait. Takes you 4 days right now in an EV. Hopefully it'll take you, a regular amount of time with this many chargers in place.
There will be fee charge to use that station.
At this time, there is no charge. The city will be paying for the electrical costs.
These are small chargers. I'll just say that they're level 2 chargers. They're not fast chargers. So as far as I understand it, it's just a little top-up type charging. It's not the level 3 chargers like the one that BC Hydro had installed. Those are considered the rapid chargers. So, and they can do a full charge.
The 3s are 30 minutes, and then the level 2s could be up to 4 hours. But the level 2s are not designed. They're branded as stop and shops. So you go and you actually start charging, then you shop in the community that you're staying at. They're kind of waiting for their charge to happen. So they're not necessarily designed for rapid, but to more promote tourism and to have access to some chargers in the community. Thank you. Thanks. I was on the committee.
And you were listening to every word.
Moving on to the next section, which would be Special Projects Human Resources on page 53. The next item is Public Works HR Assessment Report. And this project cost is $50,000 funded through taxation. There's a question here.
So with this type of training program, is it in-house or are we bringing in trainers?
I believe that is actually the next item on the.
Oh, okay.
So maybe I'll just introduce that. So is the standard work procedures, field hazard assessment and training. And this project cost is $100,000, funded $50,000 through surplus and $50,000 through taxation.
Thank you, Councillor. This would be through a consultant, would be coming in and looking at all of the procedures and refreshing all of them all at once to give us a full, robust system. If staff had to go through and do these, it would just take way too much time.
Okay, thank you.
And the next item is, and the final item is on page 55. And this is under our legislated category. The title is Housing Needs Assessment. Project cost is $20,000. It's funded out of surplus and grant. And this concludes the document. Hearing no items that have been flagged, I would like to recommend that the recommendation on the agenda be discussed with council. Thank you.
So the recommendations that council recommend to the regular meeting of council on December 13, 2020 the adoption of the 2022 capital budget and special projects as presented. Moved by Councillor Randhawa, seconded by. Yep. Seconded by Councillor Ady. Discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Okay, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Cunningham, seconded by Councillor Randhawa. All those in favor? Any opposed? We'll see you at 7 o'clock tonight.